The federal poverty level is based on an old methodology focused on the cost of food as a portion of expenses and does not capture what basic needs cost today. Today's federal poverty level probably does not even cover rent in many markets, let alone a full budget with food and healthcare and other costs for an individual or family. This is why we need the Rhode Island standard of need to quantify a more realistic measure of expenses to cover basic needs.
I'm Art Handy, a state representative in Cranston, and really pleased to be able to be here to sort of kick us off and welcome folks here to the Economic Progress Institute's Rhode Island Standard of Need, the 25th edition of it. EPI is really known for producing research, reports, and policy briefs on a mix of different topics related to poverty, income inequality, social welfare, these publications that they do, in addition to the advocacy that they do around them, really serve as resources for policymakers like me, journalists, like folks that are here in the room, as well as other advocates. They're partner advocates that come up here to help push for the legislation that we really need to see move forward. I especially find the Standard of Need report to be particularly helpful because it really centers on the goal of economic and racial justice here in the state and how we're going to get there. So let me then move right along and introduce Alan Kridsky from the Economic Policy Institute, who's going to really go through this report with us and welcome our next guest after him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Handy. I'm Alan Kridsky, Director of Research and Fiscal Policy at the Economic Progress Institute, and I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm excited to share with you some highlights from our Keystone Biennial Report, the Rhode Island Standard of Need. We released the 2024 edition a few months ago, but I think it's critical to share this information now, as the new legislative session gets underway. And here at the State House, because the information examples we present in this report are the sorts of things policymakers ought to have in mind as they, or rather you, as some of you here in this room and in this building, make decisions about the state budget and legislation. I want to start by posing a question. Why is the Rhode Island Standard of Need report even necessary? Doesn't the government already measure poverty? The federal poverty level is based on an old methodology focused on the cost of food as a portion of expenses and does not capture what basic needs cost today. Today's federal poverty level probably does not even cover rent in many markets, let alone a full budget with food and healthcare and other costs for an individual or family. This is why we need the Rhode Island Standard of Need to quantify a more realistic measure of expenses to cover basic needs. Beyond estimating what it costs to meet basic needs, we need the Rhode Island Standard of Need to explain how critical work support and other assistance programs can help narrow or bridge the gap when wage income is not enough. Such programs and the policies that give rise to them are what hold the line for many low and modest income Rhode Islanders. I'm really thrilled to share with you what's new about the 12th edition of the report, how we're breaking new ground. To start, we're using a new data source from one of our national partners, the Economic Policy Institute, their Family Budget Calculator. One exciting advantage of this is that the calculator is available online. You're free to go to it and even make comparisons across the nation. The calculator uses the same 6 expense categories we've always used and many of the same underlying data sources. However, there are a few differences. The inclusion of internet access and healthcare copays and deductibles, as well as averaging in car purchases and financing, not just maintenance and the gas. All additions that are quite reasonable ones for a basic needs budget. In addition, the report makes use of another data source, the Elder Index out of UMass Boston, to consider a basic needs budget for Rhode Island seniors. And finally, the budget calculator also provides county-level data for Rhode Island and across the country. For the first time, the Standard of Need report highlights geographical diversity. After all, we know that costs are not the same across the state. Let's take the example of a single parent with 2 kids. The lowest costs are in Providence County at just under $79,000 for a family of 3, while the highest costs are in Newport County at just under $104,000, with corresponding differences in pre-tax income required. Of course, this does not mean that everyone in Newport County is high income. We know that there's considerable poverty in Newport County, but maybe because of the wealth, the average cost of rent and food and other things might be higher than in Providence County, making it even harder for low and modest income families to make ends meet. We need to be paying more attention to these sorts of geographical differences across the state, in part to think about whether programs and policies need to be attuned to such differences. Now, we don't have time to read and review each of the report's 10 key findings, but I'd like to touch on most of them by pulling out and highlighting 3 critical points. First, basic needs are expensive, and many Rhode Islanders do not have enough income to cover them. Let's start with the traditional 3 family types the report has long considered: a single parent with 2 children, 2 parents with 2 children, and a single adult without children. This table shows annual expenses, that is, a basic needs budget for each of the 3 family types, as well as the pre-tax income required to have enough income after taxes to pay for basic needs. Our new data source, the Family Budget Calculator, goes beyond this, what we've done in the previous editions, by providing data for 10 family types, 1 or 2 adults with 0 to 4 children. And here in one table are the statewide numbers for all 10 family types, along with hourly wages needed to have the annual pre-tax income to afford basic needs. Obviously, the larger the family, the higher the costs. However, while the 2-parent families in the report have both parents with full-time jobs and can pool income, the single parents need much higher paying jobs to make ends meet, as can be seen in the bottom row by the high hourly wages required. Here we see the details for a single parent with 2 children. Their basic needs budget is a bit above $83,000, requiring income of close to $100,000 pre-tax to make ends meet. Now, although some people might think this unrealistically high, when one starts breaking down the amounts, the numbers are not so wild. The rent and utilities take up 21% of the budget, and many people cannot find rent at fair market rates. Key finding 8 in the report looks at the notion of a housing wage, what people need to afford housing without being cost burdened or spending over 30% of income on housing. Food costs here are not much more than $200 per week for a family of 3, and quality childcare appropriate for a 4-year-old and 8-year-old is $1,755 per month. The budget is calculated without subsidies, but remember that with wages of close to $100,000, this family would be at 400% or 4 times the federal poverty level, so would not necessarily qualify for much beyond healthcare marketplace subsidies. Now, let's look at the example of a single parent not making that sort of money. In this report, we consider a single parent earning $16.85 per hour above minimum wage in a customer service job. This places the family at 141% of the federal poverty level. Their monthly income, including SNAP and WIC and tax credits on top of their wage income, would fall far short of the almost $7,000 in monthly expenses for a family of 3. This is what we see in the first column of data here. The entire family does qualify for Right Care, the state's Medicaid program, dropping healthcare costs to 0, and also qualifies for CCAP childcare assistance, dropping the cost by over $1,500. Still, the family falls short by over $900 per month. That's column 2. Now, let's imagine we instituted a rental subsidy so the family need not pay more than 30% of income for housing. Better, but still $350 short per month, as we see in column 3. Let's get really wild and imagine Congress reinstitutes the enhanced child tax credit provided under COVID 1 year, and the state created a new child tax credit supplementing the federal one. Now the family has a few dollars extra per month beyond basic expenses. What this all shows is that the work support programs we have in place are really helpful, but sometimes simply not enough. Also remember, the basic needs budget does not cover vacation or other leisure expenses, or saving for emergencies or retirement, and many low-wage jobs do not include paid vacation or sick time, so any sick days during the year could cut down on the family's income. Let's take one other case. A single adult who makes $23.47 per hour, and remember that number for later, $23.47, as a medical records specialist, so annual pre-tax income of just under $49,000. This is just enough to cover basic needs, according to the Rhode Island Standard Need, for a single adult without children. Now, let's say this individual is an ailing parent they wish to help care for. This person has been paying into TCI, the state's paid leave, family leave program, with the recent expansion of the program, which by 2026 will entitle participants to job-protected paid leave of up to 8 weeks per year. This person could take time off to help their ill parent. However, the program does not provide full or even close to full wage replacement. Whereas the top replacement wage in Massachusetts is 80%, and in Connecticut is 95%, in Rhode Island it's about 60%. This means that for 8 weeks, this individual will be taking a 40% wage cut, leaving them with close to $2,500 less in total post-tax income for the year. That amount short of what they needed to cover basic needs. This is an unfair dilemma. Care for the parent and use the benefit they've paid into over the years, but not have enough money to pay for their own basic needs, or forego the benefit and don't take the time off and not spend those weeks helping one's parent to a greater extent. Highlight 2, there are racial, ethnic, and gender income disparities that impact who can afford a basic needs budget. In this report, we also try to understand these racial, ethnic, and gender income disparities. Here we see that for single adults, the percentages of working-age Black and Latino Rhode Islanders who do not have enough pre-tax income to cover basic expenses are higher than for white and Asian Rhode Islanders. And the percentage of working-age women without enough income is higher than that of men. For parents with 2 children, the percentage without enough income to cover basic needs expenses is much higher for Latino families than for white non-Latino families. And here, we see how income is not distributed equitably by race and ethnicity. If things were equitable, we would expect all these columns to be the same height across categories. Across racial ethnic categories, the same percentage of Rhode Islanders would have the lowest incomes and the highest, but that's not what we see. And I just want to add one additional note on the data. I would love to be able to dig deeper and share with you insights on differences among subgroups. For example, we know that the category Asian is far too broad and likely obscures differences among East Asian, South Asian, and Southeast Asian communities, and differences within those communities, including with the data point on the previous slide. And we don't have data here about indigenous communities. However, all the data we use for such analyses, such as most US Census data, are based on limited interviews and small sample sizes. Especially for a state the size of Rhode Island, it's difficult to find data that will allow drawing conclusions or making generalizations with any sort of confidence about differences among subpopulation groups. This is one of the challenges of our research and analytical work. So we need more and better collection of disaggregated data. For example, the sort of thing championed a few years ago by RISN required collection of such data by the state's education department. Okay. Last thing to highlight, for 2 decades, Rhode Island has disinvested state revenue in cash and child care assistance. Last year, we celebrated EPI's first 25 years, and in that regard, we brought a historical dimension to the report by featuring 3 retrospectives. One on the report itself in relation to the federal poverty level, another about child care assistance, and a third about the state's cash assistance program, Rhode Island Works. Child care assistance is something needed not by only the lowest income Rhode Island families, but also by many modest income, even middle income Rhode Islanders who do not have the income to afford quality child care. This is important in part because without affordable child care, the entire economy is affected. What this chart shows is how the majority of child care assistance dollars once came from state revenue sources, in the blue, but that the state started cutting its investment in fiscal year 2006, whereas we once spent over $50 million per year in state funds to support families in this way, we now spend only about $10 million. And this is in absolute dollars, not inflation-adjusted dollars. Over $40 million less each year. Despite improvements over the years to programs, and we should applaud lawmakers for the recent increase to 261% of the federal poverty level of the entry income eligibility limit for CCAP, this sort of state spending is not enough to help enough families make ends meet. Turning now to Rhode Island Works. The state's cash assistance program, for those with the fewest resources, something that Handy has been a champion of. From 1991 through 2020, the monthly benefit amount remained flat at $554 for a family of 3. So no inflation adjustment for close to 3 decades. It went up to $721 in 2021 without any inflation adjustment built in, and was raised once more in 2024 to $865. Truly helpful, and we should have gratitude to the General Assembly and Governor for enacting this, though again, unfortunately, without an annual inflation adjustment built in. With inflation adjustments, that original $554 for a family of 3 will be close to $1,300 per month today. Now, here in orange, we see federal spending on cash assistance and state spending in blue. As you can see, 27 years ago, we were spending over $50 million per year in state funds, and that dropped to $0 in fiscal year 2010, and has remained at $0 ever since. And even the federal dollars we directed to the program remain lower than when we were also spending state dollars 15 years ago. The monthly benefit, not protected by an automatic inflation adjustment from losing value each year, was once close to 60% of the federal poverty level, as you can see on this slide. It has remained below 50% since 1997, when state funding started to drop. And 50% of the federal poverty level is the cutoff for what is termed deep poverty. For children, deep poverty can have lasting educational, health, and developmental effects. This means that our Rhode Island Works Cash benefit has been set and kept at a level that keeps people in deep poverty. This is, in effect, our official state policy. Keep people with fewest financial resources in deep poverty. A reinvestment of state dollars could bring the cash assistance level back above the deep poverty cutoff and keep it above with a built-in annual inflation adjustment. With both of these programs, we detect a long-term state disinvestment in Rhode Island families and children. And in the context of close to $5 billion in annual spending of state revenue, even with the budget challenges we face, surely we could re-examine our priorities and direct a few tens of millions of dollars back into these programs and start rebuilding our state investment. After all, the annual state budget is a statement of our values and priorities. And it is long past time when we make investments more in line with what we claim are our values and priorities, and make sure that no child in Rhode Island remains in deep poverty. And during this legislative session, we, or you for those of you who are legislators, ought to take a comprehensive look at the budget in the context of a report like the Rhode Island Standard of Need, and evaluate whether as a whole, and in its individual proposals, it is doing enough to help Rhode Islanders meet their most basic needs when wages and income are not enough, to provide a foundation for more Rhode Islanders to pursue many more opportunities. In the epilogue to this edition of the Rhode Island Standard of Need, marking EPI's first 25 years, we look to the next 25 years. We imagine what it would mean to replace a basic needs wage with a true living wage. We imagine going beyond the measurement of a standard of need to establishing a standard of opportunity, even a standard of thriving. A Rhode Island in which we end the gender pay gap and the racial wealth gap, in which all Rhode Islanders can pursue opportunities and build intergenerational wealth and thrive. Let's start measuring that. Thank you. And now I turn this over to Dr. Christopher West, Executive Director of the African American Museum of Rhode Island.
Good afternoon. It is my honor to be here. My name is Dr. Christopher West. I'm the Executive Director of the African American Museum of Rhode Island. Budgets are moral documents. They make statements about where we allocate our priorities. I recognize that the state legislators are grappling with a range of different needs. Contingency plan for the substructure remover for the Washington Street Bridge. The underlying needs for Our Lady Fatima and the Roger Williams Hospital. Pension concerns. And when you're making these types of decisions, you're going to make these decisions and put a drop in the bucket. What we're looking at is something more than a drop in the bucket. We're asking for an opportunity to truly distinguish Rhode Island. Project 2347 is based upon a premise. It's data-driven. The Economic Progress Institute had a report, and I was listening to Alan speak at their presentation and sketching it out. Because the fundamental premise is that if we are going to be a state that offers the opportunity for you to engage, we need to engage them at the level that is going to be subsistence. And that number is $23.47 an hour, which means that the engagement that we're building at our institution, which is a museum, is object-based learning. From a single object, you can tell a story. Cognitive development, learning, foundation for an institution. And more importantly, that a young person can come back to the state because they're leaving the state for a lack of opportunity, and say that they can build a story. They're going to tell a narrative. And in telling that narrative, they tell that narrative in a way that they're compensated at a level that we know that they need. Again, $23.47 an hour. We recognize the opportunity for excellence. That, to me, is an opportunity to make a difference. The legislature is going to make decisions in a limited situation in difficult budget times. We will make drops in the bucket to try to do infrastructure work. And all these things will simply move the ball forward. We're looking for a moonshot. We're looking for an opportunity for you to actually think about, if I could make a difference with a little bit of resources, what would that be? And it would be you. It would be looking at Black and Latino youth, and they would say that if we can give them the opportunity to work in a way that actually works for them, that means that we potentially, in the long term, make a difference. And if we're just going to do ROI, then ROI it is. Because we know that a return on investment for you, in the long term, makes a difference. That's our story. Appreciate the time, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. West. My name is Nina Harrison. I'm the Policy Director at the Economic Progress Institute. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Rep. Handy, Rep. Kislak, Rep. Tansey. I really appreciate your support and your championship of these issues, as well as the advocates. We're all here because we care about human dignity, equity, and economic opportunity. We want children, seniors, singles, families, workers, and the disabled all across Rhode Island to be able to meet their basic needs and have opportunities to thrive. We've just heard some hard facts from Dr. Krinsky, our resident research guy. And I want us not to be discouraged, because even though those facts are difficult, and even though we are also facing an onslaught of federal actions that seek to roll back progress, threaten the rights and programs that we've worked so hard to secure, what I'm asking you to do in the face of those hard facts and those onslaughts is keep fighting. Don't back down. Speak truth to power and hold the line. Do not get distracted by nonsense and noise, which there are a lot of these days. And lucky for many of us in this room, we are ready. We have our arguments ready. We have our research ready. We have our facts ready. And we're ready to fight this battle. To that end, EPI has released our 2025 budget and policy priorities, our one-page version. There will be a longer one coming. But currently our one-page of budget and policy priorities is available on our website. And I'd like to talk to you about just a few of those, because really all of our policies, policy and budget priorities are focused around reversing the numbers that Dr. Krinsky spoke about, making sure that the majority of Rhode Islanders are not struggling to meet their basic needs, but instead that the majority of Rhode Islanders can meet their basic needs and have opportunities for upward mobility. So I'd like to highlight a few of these priorities. The first is we need revenue in Rhode Island. We all know we're facing a budget deficit here in our state, a rather large one, and this is not a new issue. Prior to the influx of federal money during COVID, we faced similar problems before, and this may go back to prior tax reform in the early 2000s, and we seem to have faced budget deficits since then. And so one of our priorities this year, our biggest priority, is to make sure that Rhode Island has enough revenue to operate. Not just to operate, but to function and provide the programs and services that hundreds of thousands of Rhode Islanders have come to rely on. Public transportation, public education, roads and bridges, which we know we're having serious issues with bridges and expensive issues. And to think that we can wish these issues away without the money it's going to cost to fix them is not realistic. So I'm here to ask us to be realistic and to support a proposal that would create a 3% surtax for the highest income earners in Rhode Island, the top 1%. This would only affect Rhode Islanders earning more than $625,000 a year, and it would only apply to income earned above $625,000 a year. And doing this, which would only affect 5,700 tax filers, would raise $190 million every year for the state of Rhode Island. Money that we all know is desperately needed for our respective causes, like childcare, like roads and bridges, like public education, and more. And so I'm really urging the General Assembly and everybody here who wants to advocate to the General Assembly to prioritize the needs of 900,000+ Rhode Islanders over the luxury and comfort of 5,700 of the most wealthy income earners in Rhode Island. And that could make a huge difference. That wouldn't only affect and benefit those 900,000, but that would improve the lives of all Rhode Islanders, including the wealthiest who would be contributing their fair share. The second is a bill that would end predatory payday lending that targets Black and Latino communities and allows them to charge up to 260% interest in those communities. At this point, not only is it predatory, discriminatory, and well documented on all those fronts, there are also assorted options for people with low or no credit through banks and credit unions. So there are much better alternatives. And all this is doing is victimizing vulnerable Rhode Islanders and sending their hard-earned money straight out of the state where it can't be reused in the Rhode Island economy. And we're the only state in New England that allows this, and it's frankly shameful at this point. So please support us in fighting to get rid of payday lending here in Rhode Island. Our longtime Senator Jack Reed has also been championing this at the federal level and has done a lot of work to protect service members from this kind of predatory lending. And finally, I want to talk to you about equity impact statements. There will be bills introduced in each chamber asking the General Assembly to create some equity impact statements for legislation and for the proposed budget. As Dr. West mentioned, our budget should be a moral document. It should reflect the values and the needs of all Rhode Islanders. And equity impact statements are ways to stop and analyze, much like a fiscal note, how certain legislation or parts of the budget will affect different communities in Rhode Island. We often know that sometimes we can have the best of intentions, but there can be unintended consequences from some of our plans. And we also know that when we plan carefully, we can have targeted improvements in areas where we have identified the need for such improvements. So we ask you to look out lovingly for all Rhode Islanders by passing the bill to require equity impact statements for proposed bills and the state budget. Finally, I would like to thank the General Assembly because we had a lot of great wins last year. EPI, the coalitions that we work with, a lot of you that we work with together, including expanding the paid family leave program for 2 more weeks from 6 to 8 weeks over the next, through 2026. Expanding the cash assistance benefits for the Rhode Island Works program, increasing the income eligibility for the child care assistance program. These are meaningful differences in people's lives. We also finished codifying at the state level protections, the consumer protections in the Affordable Care Act. So what I'm trying to say to you is not only thank you, but when we fight, we win. So I invite you again to fight with us. I'm looking forward to fighting and working alongside you all. Thank you again for coming. And lastly, I would just like to plug an event that's going on down the hall at the State House Library. The Rhode Island Food Bank is hosting Food Insecurity Awareness Day. So if you want to just, it's right on your way out, please stop by and we'll probably see you there. Thank you.